Okay, I think we have quite a number of questions there, John. You probably need a microphone.
Right, David Crumman asked costs. How do we bring down costs generally? Competition. And I think that there isn't a general prescription. One can look at a range of different areas, like rents, where the market is allowed to work, they're coming down. But I think there's a big problem in the business area, although I think that the market will force changes there. Whatever the legal agreements are, the firms aren't going to continue in business if rents remain where they are. There are other areas where I'd be concerned, say, like electricity, where the minister said he was going to force down electricity prices. Actually, there's a market there which works. Electricity prices are set in the market, where the problem is that the costs in the ESB are wrong. And if the minister transferred the ownership of the grid to EirGrid as previously planned, so the ESB had to bid against everybody else for the job of building and maintaining the grid, you would put major downward pressure on costs. Similarly, in areas like water, if we turn the water supply, which is in 40-something authorities in the country, into a single utility and operated like BGE, where you bought in the people to mend the pipes, you will put major downward pressure on costs. I think the problem about this is, and you'll never get a prime time program on this, because it's a series of messy things. The banks are great, the macroeconomy is great, and unemployment is great. You can capture that. But these small issues, which we've ducked and not dealt with. Another area is concerning competition in the retail area. Bring in new entrants. One thing, if you put together 7 large sites in Ireland and said that just as in electricity you weren't going to allow the incumbent to bid for them, that a new entrant could bid for them, that would set the cat among the pigeons. We've got to look at these kind of areas. Pat McGardle raised the issue on wage rates because people came from abroad who were paid less, and how did it affect the economy? But first of all, they had to be found somewhere to live. And if you look at the paper by David Duffy, myself, and Eva Carney, that's just one element. And people came from Poland, and they could have gone to Britain. In order to come to Ireland, which they'd never heard of, they had to earn more than in Britain. So that the fact that the labour market had changed, and sort of the evidence is there, I sort of give the references here, that the labour market is such that if demand goes up, in order to bring in the additional employment, if supply curve slopes upward, wage rates have to rise, and that's what we saw. Sarah Carey from the Irish Times asked, our wage rates are in the mid-range, why do we need to cut them? I began off by saying, I'm not going to look at where we are relative to other countries. I'm going to say, what price will see full employment in Ireland in 2015? Yes, we are paid less than in some countries, although the labour costs, depending on whether it's the employer or the employee, yes, we're not the highest labour costs in Europe by any chance, but we are going to have a bloody massive number unemployed. It is how you get those unemployed back, and if you look at the research in the working paper 287, where we look at, as we go through this in more detail in answer to your question and Pat's, and I think that in order to see full employment, we need a world recovery, we need to get things right in terms of public finances here, and we need to reprice ourselves. If we hadn't gone through the mess we're in, well then we probably could have got by with higher wage rates. Donald Donovan about the currency, and Dermot O'Leary as well. Yes, Sweden and Finland tried to do what we are doing in the first 2 years in 1990, 1991 to see wage rates fall, but of course people knew that the currency was flexible, so they did dilly-dallied and actually then cut their exchange rate, but they changed their exchange rate policy, and that helped price them back in the market. We do not have that option. However, what our model suggests, and we remain, this is an experiment, we remain to see whether this will happen. And there is a lot of evidence. If you ask any journalists, their wage rates have been cut. If you ask anybody in the public sector, their wage rates have been cut. So our estimate is that the fall, right, in Finland they grossly overshot, as happens with the exchange rates. With wage rates achieving a real depreciation through wage rates, you tend not to overshoot, you tend to do it a bit too gradually. So the amount that you have to fall cut by, our model would suggest 7% would probably, where wage rates are rising at 1% or more in other countries. That is what, based on the research evidence over the last 30 years in the Irish economy, that is what will price us back into the market. It would be pleasant if we could just do it all today, but we can't. In terms of Dermot O'Leary, well, obviously, I think what I published last week is still correct. I do change my mind occasionally, but not that often. We published two scenarios. We are uncertain about the rest of the world, but with my colleagues from the ESRI in Europe met in Vienna 2 weeks ago, people are very pessimistic about this year and next year. There's no sign of green shoots, hence this conference is full. But looking at when the recovery comes, there was a general feeling that you will see a temporary period of more rapid growth. And what we've done is we've looked at two scenarios where there's a delayed recovery or a recovery in 2011. We are midway between the two, the high and the low in the IMF, their recent publication. We would be slightly below the OECD's latest figures. So on the rest of the world, we may be a bit optimistic, and if it's delayed another year, the recovery to 2012, but then the permanent loss of output in Ireland will be another 3-4 percentage points, and the recovery on unemployment will be delayed another 2 or 3 years. Yes, I don't have a crystal ball, I can't tell you what will happen, but based on the behaviour of the Irish economy and the world economy insofar as it's relevant to us, that is our best estimate of what will happen. Alan Dukes asked about non-wage competitiveness, and on that I think I already said that there's a lot of details thing. Oh, and the other thing which you raised was the issue of taxation. The paper which I put in there on the incidence of taxation, we looked at this in detail, and people get excited. For example, carbon taxes. Oh, my company will be hit. Yeah, a few companies will be hit relatively heavily by carbon tax. But what the modelling shows is that on average, that the business sector will pay less tax if you cut carbon tax than if you were able to, or raise carbon tax if you were able to reduce income tax, which of course you can't do. That if you have to raise tax, yes, a few people will be hurt, but the economy as a whole will be much better off than if you raise income tax or VAT or taxes that impact the labour market. So go for it on the carbon tax, go for it on property tax if you want to solve the unemployment problem. And the final thing was on the UK unemployment rate question up there. Yes, we think that we will see a return to unemployment, a return to significant emigration from Ireland. As soon as we see a world recovery, that people will head off because there's the skilled people who are in the labour market will head off for a bit of an adventure somewhere else, especially if they have a lousy job in Ireland. And we will see some outflow in the recovery period because Irish people are very mobile. And that will help solve the unemployment problem. We will see some reduction, but not that much. But over the next decade, if the Irish economy does recover in the way we suggest, you would probably see some return to immigration, a much more moderate, in the latter half of the next decade. My feeling is the population in 2020, that over that period you'll see no net migration. However, of all the things that people have forecast about the Irish economy, the thing that people have been most wrong in the last 75 years is forecasting immigration.
John, could I ask you just to hold on for one moment, because although we're hopefully just about on time, I just one final question. I think Mark Colm, one very quick question.
As well, you rightly said you wouldn't get these questions on electricity asked on prime time, but you will on News Talk will be interviewing the Minister about electricity. And we'll also be asking about air grid. Wages in the public sector are 20% higher than wages in the private sector. Peter Cassell's institute is on record as saying, drawing on his wisdom from partnership in the late 80s, no economy can be run in a situation where public service pay is significantly higher than private sector pay. Do you agree that reversing that relationship is the first priority from both the competitiveness point of view and the public finance point of view?
From the competitiveness point of view, very important, but if you read our paper, and you'll see that actually it doesn't, sort of in terms of solving the public finances, because so much of the cuts in pay actually come back in cuts in taxes, that it is important, but it actually is less important in terms of dealing with the public finance problem than some other increase in tax or cuts in other areas of expenditure. But I think it's hugely important in terms of competitiveness.